Okay.
That's perfect, yeah.
Hey, how are you? I'm Jason. I'm on microphone. Sorry.
And I need the microphone. So just tell me when Anin Tansi Tanishe. I'm Justin Bear, and I'm the artistic director at Urban Shaman Gallery. Thank you everyone for taking the time to come out and see the opening reception of Jason Lujan's solo exhibition, Expanded Dreaming, and for taking the time to come to our space for the artist talk and tune in live for the live stream. We're here at Urban Shaman since 1996. Urban Shaman has been serving the needs of emerging mid-career and established artists. We support artists in being exposed to the local, national, and international arts world, and we help artists thrive in those spaces. We're here with Jason Lujan, who's originally from Marfa, Texas, and he's had an extensive 20-year-long career as an artist and arts administrator in New York, and currently lives in Toronto. We're at Expanded Dreaming, and Expanded Dreaming explores the transnational experience and aesthetics through an Indigenous lens. It thinks about the open air market and capitalism as a site of assemblage. I was really excited to see Jason's submission for his show, because I feel like Winnipeg really needs to see work like this, where it really pushes the boundaries of what Indigenous art is and what it's allowed to engage with. So the international scope for me was important. So Jason's influence of his time in Japan and his engagement with Japanese electronics through that Indigenous lens was really cool to me, and I have never seen anything like that here in this city. Winnipeg is a site of refuge for many people. There's people who from all over the world who call Winnipeg their home, and our neighborhoods reflect that, and particularly the neighborhoods that Indigenous people live in the inner city, are a site of a cultural milieu. And I think this show really encourages us to look outwards into our environment as Indigenous people and to see our own potentialities in those spaces. So for Winnipeg, it's really cool because I really love the streets of Ellis and Sargent with all the businesses and all the signage. The old school signage, the vinyl signage has inspired me, and to be encouraged to think about those spaces and those aesthetics as an Indigenous person was really cool. And so when I saw this submission, I was like, we have to have this here, and so I'm really excited to hear what Jason has to share with us today. We've had some great conversations, so I think I'm gonna pass it over. I just want to say thank you to our funders, so Canada Council for the Arts, Manitoba Arts Council, and Winnipeg Arts Council for making this possible. And I'd also like to thank our staff, Angela Ducharme, Theo Pelmis, and Debbie Keeper, for doing all the hard work and all the back-end work to make this possible. And then I'd like to thank Scott Fitzgerald from the Broadcast Collective for coming here today and running this awesome live stream, and Scotland Cook for having us for a studio visit the other day. So I'm gonna pass it over to Jason.
Hello, I'm Jason. Thank you so much to Urban Shaman. I want to express my gratitude and thanks to the staff, to Justin, Tio, Angela, and Debbie. I've had an amazing experience, and also the art-going public of Winnipeg. It's been extremely rewarding to be here. I've been here about a week, And one of the things that I've noticed that sets this place apart from other art spaces is the emphasis on the non-Western model of art making and art experiences. The Western framework of art is value-based assessment, whereas an artist makes something and then an audience or a gatekeeper will arrive and give it a value. My understanding is the indigenous art making experience is based around relationships. It's less about the outcome and it's more about the connections that a person makes with the community and the people around them. And Urban Shaman definitely follows this trajectory. When I arrived, I felt a lot of support. I was able to just come in and hang out at the gallery. We chatted, we had lunch, we broke bread together. And I actually leave with such a great feeling of my experiences with the people of Winnipeg as I've met them. The people of Winnipeg are extremely generous and outgoing. And I will actually miss this place once I have to leave in about 24 hours. One of the things I'd like to point to is the title here on the wall and the translation at the top. Justin alluded to international and cultural exchange, and I really liked how there was an offer to translate the title of the show from expanded dreaming into the local languages. So we have Anishinaabe, Moan, we have Cree, and Métis? Michif. Okay, so you can tell I'm not from here. Michif. And then, of course, those all are the way of saying expanded dreaming. And for me, language is very important. I speak a few languages, just enough to be dangerous, so I'm always interested in interpretation of things. This gallery is getting kind of warm, so I'm going to try to take us through it as succinctly as possible, and I'll touch on a few artworks, and I'll give those of you who are visiting with me a chance to handle some of these. I've gotten a lot of questions about the materials. People are curious about what exactly is it. So because I'm here, I'll frighten the curator. I'll take the stuff out and we can look at them together, okay? So let's move over this way. And I want to start with these radios. So just a little bit of background about myself. I spent 20 years in New York City, and originally I'm from Texas, as Justin had mentioned. And the experience of living in New York was, it took a lot to get used to. It's a completely different system. But one of the things is that and this is just my take on things, is that there is no concept of indigeneity in New York, no matter what you may read here and there. It's very isolated. So therefore, when you meet a person, if you're ethnically ambiguous, or it's not immediately obvious, an accent or something, very essentialized, they'll just assume you're half of whatever they are. And so with that in mind, there was I was able to sort of disappear into the fabric of the city and the city community there. I come from a particular generation where being Indigenous was not necessarily of a high value. It was one of the things that you didn't want to necessarily put out there. You kind of wanted to hide and be part of the general social fabric. To be Indigenous in New York City is actually very comparable to the immigrant experience of coming to the United States. You show up, you realize no one around you is like you, so you immediately try to jettison everything about your cultural roots as quickly as possible and try to engage in other communities and groups. It's something that you'll hear about if you look at immigration stories and if you watch a lot of television. People come in from China, they move to Florida, and they become rappers, jettisoning everything about where they're from. So it's unusual to be in a time and place where, because of the economy around indigeneity, suddenly there is a new value to being native. But my artwork doesn't reflect that. My artwork is more about a kind of working with things around me and tools, objects, machines that I've engaged with, that I have an interest in, and then adapting them and elevating them so that they're useful to me in my own kind of way. And in doing so, integrating my own, native understandings with that, but not in an overt way. It's kind of a coded language. The idea is that if you look at something of mine, the hope is that you have an artistic experience first. And then if you're able to read some of that coded language, you can have that cultural experience a little later, but it's not necessary. Sometimes it's possible for someone to make something, especially if it's based around identity, and it's so self-contained, there's only one avenue of approach, and if you don't have access to that avenue, you don't really get a lot out of it. And I think about that when I'm making work all the time. What I'm going to try to do today is answer a couple of questions, and the two questions are, Why this show here, and why this show now? And I think those are the questions that I always ask when I travel and I look at other artworks. For me, contemporary art is a sign of, it's indicative of the time that we live in. And then it's a moment in time, and I think this exhibition is a moment in time here in Winnipeg. So I'll start with the radio. So I tend to work a lot with communication devices, or items that have some sort of communication component. This is a radio that I cast from, here, Michael, go over here. Yeah, hold on to these batteries for me. So during COVID, my family was at home and we were spending too much time on our screens. So my wife made a rule, and she said, every day, don't put those in your pocket. Just hold on to them. So we had a rule, and we said, okay, we're gonna have family time. Go out and order a bunch of jigsaw puzzles and things, and we're not going to have anything to do with the computer. So I had this old Sony radio, and we would play music on the radio because we couldn't have a computer or a laptop. And so this is a reproduction of that radio, and I made several reproductions of that radio. Radios are useful as a survival component because when power goes down, your cell phones don't work, and the one recourse that you have is a radio. In New York City, when we had the blackout in 2005, the city dispensed people at every subway entrance with a large radio, and the communities could go out and congregate and what's going on right now if you didn't have a radio. And they would have it tuned in, and you would know that there was still no power coming. But that things weren't falling apart. There were no riots. Everything was going to be fine. The subway wasn't running. So I think of a radio as one of those go-back kind of devices. For me personally, it's about the time I spent with my family. But what I did was I started getting curious because as this radio was in our kitchen and we were listening to it, and you don't really realize how good you have it with a computer until you have to get up and change the station between advertisements on a radio, by the way. Every 2 minutes, oh, there goes the music, or it's really loud ads. So I wanted to make some, and I wanted to highlight the structure on the inside. So I'm going to pass this around. I'll start with you. And you can turn it around back and forth and take a look. I really liked how, so I used the structure of the radio to talk about I wanted to talk about what's inside the radio as well and how it works. And then I would just customize the nameplate, and I could do this over and over again. Each time, though, I had to buy another radio. So I'd buy a radio, take the case off, construct a new case and put it on. And I could come up with a number of variations on it. So they're not additions, it's a variant. There's a series of works, and each one has a different nameplate and a different color. The first one I did was completely transparent, and it had gold knobs. Everything works. So actually, I'm going to take it away from you, and I'm going to try to put some batteries in it, and I'm going to see if we can get it to work. This is completely unrehearsed. So if it doesn't work, I might go jump in the river. But let's go see. This is why I left the back off. Artists have advised me about putting work out there that works because they say if there's a break, it will you'll be on call for the rest of your life. Actually, I don't see it working. Well, okay.
Which river are you jumping in?
Yeah. I guess we'll do the Red River, because there's a Red River in Texas, by the way, and it forms the northern border of the state. But it's a really fun coincidence how these things turn out once you, nope, okay. We will have to edit that out. No, it doesn't work. Well, that's embarrassing. This shows the value of rehearsal. Here you go. So you can take a look at it. And these are made out of cast resin. So what I did was I took the case of the radio, I took it apart, I took the components, and then re-engineered them, and then had them made out of different materials. I think these batteries are not good. So I'm just kidding. It's just a joke. Those aren't real. Those are gold-plated batteries. No. So those are the radios. So that's generally how I work, is I'll have something, and like an artist, if you're everyone who's creative or who has things, sometimes you'll find yourself at home and you'll have something, and we no longer use the radio because COVID, that period of isolation ended and we could all go back to our computers. But I would have this on my shelf and I would keep looking at it, and then you start imagining, well, what would it look like if it had this, or what would it look like if it had these features? And much in the way where all of us at some point in our lives have had something and we've taken a Sharpie or a pen and we've decorated or changed it up or put a sticker on it. And I really like that kind of customization. The story I often tell a lot is people like if you play guitar. Let's say you play guitar and then you find yourself in a space and you want to play guitar, but there isn't a guitar around. You have two choices. You can go to the store and you can buy a guitar and play that, or you can make your own guitar. And if you make your own guitar, it's a completely different experience to play a song on that than it is on something that you've just picked up or purchased. And I strive for the experience of making your own guitar. Let's keep going this way. Justin, do me a favor and keep an eye out for that radio, and then you can put it on the shelf. Okay. Thanks, once people are done. So I want to talk about this one. So this is a painting from 2016. I've only shown it once before, and then I put it away. I made this in Brooklyn when I was sharing the studio with my wife. At the time, I was working with patterns, and I like patterns because patterns suggest infinite space. And when you look at cultures of the world, especially in North America, oftentimes the worldview is informed by language first, and then later by patterns. What I wanted to do is create a painting that is indicative of contemporary city living. And in a city, everything happens all at once, and everything is happening at the same time. You're in a space where things are new next to things that are old, fast, slow, et cetera, et cetera. And so by combining patterns and putting one over the other, you're actually looking at two patterns together. You're looking at a Southwest tribal pattern next to just a black and white dazzle pattern. But it kind of works together. So you find yourself visually going back and forth between a foreground and a background. But I wasn't happy with just a painting. I wanted to add a content element to it. I had gone to the American Museum of Natural History on the Upper West Side of New York, and there they had an exhibition of, it's no longer there, it was a vitrine of a ghost dance. And I took some photos of it. Museums are moving away from mannequins now, and now you'll just have a dress form with the regalia on top. But they had a mannequin, and I took a photo of this ghost dancer. It was a person with an eagle flute. And I held on to it. I think I took this photo maybe in 2002. So I'd just been sitting around, and I decided I wanted to do something with it. I grabbed a newspaper from Chinatown, and I tried printing it out on other things. And I liked how it looked on this Chinatown newspaper, because then it became a cultural moment. It wasn't just specifically about a ghost dance mannequin. It was about, it was on with another language, there was another vernacular, and it was from a moment in time, because this newspaper was from that week. And I framed it. One of the things that I noticed as I was coming to Winnipeg was that the ghost dance started in the United States in the Great Plains, or what we call at the end of the Indian Wars. And it was kind of exported up into Manitoba and Saskatchewan next door. And then once it was adopted here, but then over time, it turned into something else. And it turned into something called, it was just a dance that's performed at night to honor ancestors. I think it's called a Chi Bai dance. So what I enjoyed about that story is that there was something, an idea had entered into Manitoba, had entered into the communities here, and then it was reconfigured to be useful to the people here. And I really like that idea because that's part of why I make some of this work. At the bio at the front, when you walk in, it mentions the open air market. And I talk about the open air market aesthetic as in, imagine you're at the center of the universe at this giant bazaar or flea market or souk, and ideas and things are coming in from one side of the universe and they're migrating their way to the other side of the universe. And as they move, they change in purpose, they change in value. And so a person going from one end to the other with the expectations of the usefulness or value of something may be surprised at how things are readapted or adapted or put into play. And that's why I have some of these other devices that I'll talk about. So I found that the ghost dance, especially at a place with an indigenous name like Urban Shaman, was appropriate. So I dug this artwork out from the archives and showed it here. because it's literally about cultural change through time. Let's go to this one over here. So the title of this artwork is Tokyo Traffic Light for Carl Beam. As an American, I did not know a lot about Carl Beam until my wife took me to see an exhibition of his at the Smithsonian in downtown New York, somewhere maybe around 2011 or 12. One of the things I noticed during this exhibition is this is a very prominent Canadian contemporary artist who's no longer with us. And the more I looked at the work, the more I really enjoyed, and I feel like it's one of those connections that spoke to me. Because here was an artist using materials of its time. He was using printmaking, but also imagery, and did a lot of traffic lights, birds, natural elements, and artificial elements, products that were around him, just much in the way that I do. The reason I call this Tokyo Traffic Light is because it ties back into the use of Carl Beam using traffic lights in some of the artworks and prints. But also, this is from a particular anime I purchased online from an auction house of, it's called Evangelion. And then there's a subtext that says, you cannot move back, or you cannot advance, you cannot retreat. And I really liked the idea, and I felt that it connected with Carl Beam's idea. As a contemporary artist, one of his biggest issues was that his work that had a lot of indigenous signifiers was purchased and collected and supported, but then he would do other artwork about his interests that went unsupported. For example, he did a series of works on singers, and he did a silkscreen of Cher and Barbra Streisand, and nobody collected those because it did not have indigenous signifiers into it necessarily, and other things, poker cards and things like that. If you ever go to a Carl Beam exhibition, which was my experience at the Smithsonian, you'll find that all of the ones that have a native dancer or an eagle or something, there'll be a courtesy of the collection of something. But all of the ones that don't have that are courtesy of the artist. And that's where I feel I sit as an artist, at this interesting intersection of reflecting the world around me, and is anyone interested in this but me, but also wanting to tie myself in and building on other artworks. In the Western contemporary art tends to be built upon the work of other artists, but I feel that it's less active in certain kinds of contemporary Native art. I feel like a lot of Native artists feel the need from just the circumstances of where we are in the time, of having to start around 1491 and kind of having to reinvent the wheel. I don't see a lot of contemporary artists taking an existing art conversation and building on that. And I wanted to change that, and so I specifically referenced contemporary Native artists such as Carl Beam, Oscar Howe, Norval Morso, and those others. And I expand those conversations through my materials and the things that I do. Ooh, okay, let's go to this pachinko machine. So the pachinko machine is something that originated in Japan. This one is called a Thunderbird Power Flash. It's from 1975. When I purchased it, it was basically how you see it now, but it was very dirty. So I spent a lot of time cleaning it. And then I thought, well, I want to make it my own. The reason I was interested in a pachinko machine, there were a couple of reasons. One is I saw, to me, what looked like something that I kind of knew what it did, but I also didn't know what it did. Like, I think it involves some sort of ball or pinball or something like that. I could figure it out. Most people have that response. Clearly, it's not something that's from here, and we recognize that fact. But the interest for me was on the playing field, this blue field back here, because I thought, well, I can get one, and I can take the stuff off and make a painting or decorate it or make something that I want it to be, and then just put everything back. But then I changed my mind with this one, and I basically just cleaned it up and refurbished it so it existed as is. I didn't bring any pachinko balls. The way you play this game is you spend $10 and you get about 100 pachinko balls. And you put them in here and you cycle them through. And if they go into pockets, you win more pachinko balls. And then the goal is to end up with more pachinko balls than you spent, and you can trade those in, then the house will repurchase them from you, and you can get money and prizes that way. So it's gambling. Where was I going with that? Okay, but I didn't want to bring pachinko balls. I like playing these. I play them at home. The house always wins, and I'm the house, so I'm happy with that. But my experience in trying to have people play these is that these things are very, very loud. And if this was here, this would drive the staff crazy. And I couldn't do that to these poor people. So these are just going to exist inert. But I can show you a little bit of the operation. And to open the front. So we have this light here that tells you the ball tray is empty, but also these actuators. So as the balls go through, it activates other certain features. Let's see if I can do it here. So like, oh, actually I have a reset. I put a cheat button here. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, well, something shifted. That's why. But as balls go through, they open and they close other things. Yeah, it's still here. But we're not going to play it. So it was just, I just opened this up to demo it and to show you how it works. Is as you cycle through balls, the odds change and they increase or they decrease as time goes by. What I really liked about this model and the reason I chose it, why this pachinko machine, is because it's called a Thunderbird. And if you look closely at the center attraction, there's a bird here and then you can see the wings and then the rest of the body. And there's a little symbol of a bird down here. But it has a gambling theme. And I thought there's nothing more native than a Thunderbird and a gambling theme. Thank you so much. It's getting warm. Being in the lights, I'm not used to. I didn't become an artist to stand under lights, by the way. So this is why I use them. And the thing is originally the goal was to just get one. I'll get one, I'll play with it, I'll customize it, I'll make my point. But then once you kind of do it, you realize, oh, I can probably do this again. It becomes easier the second time. And then just like the radios where you have variations, you can make variants of those. You can do the same with different pachinko machines. Well, now I'm feeling like I want to make something with the sky. I want to make something that involves, that integrates maybe some of the features. I want to make something that has completely new features, etc. So it became an interesting way to get something that has its own limitations of structure and then use those limitations to dictate how I'm going to re-aestheticize it. And so that became a challenge for me. I enjoy the challenge of not having a completely blank slate. We'll look at this one now. So this is one of the first sculptures I made, or a version of one of the first sculptures I made. And I made a Viewmaster. The very first Viewmaster I made was completely transparent. And the idea is that the Viewmaster would sit and you would have the reel of whatever it was. New York City was the first one I made. And then that would be the content. So we would just sit there, you'd have a reel that would say New York City. And that's all it would do. People had expectations that it could be used and you could use it, but after a while I decided I didn't want that to happen. So I started adding limiters to it. Like this still works, but I put a little arm here so it doesn't really function all the way. And it prevents people from playing with it too much. But once again, I like talking about what it's about, the structure inside. So the back is clear, the front has a basket pattern, but it's in transparent black. And then if you look at the reel is just polished brass. But you can still see how it's put together. So if you're really curious, here, you can look at this. If you're curious about how I make these, you can see the spring inside, and you get a little bit of play. Yeah. And you can pass that around too. So then, the goal is then maybe if I give you something to look at, in looking closer at this, maybe you'll understand a little more about how something is put together. And you'll start looking at other things in the same way. If you find something that perhaps you're unfamiliar with, instead of rejecting it, you'll think, oh, what is this about? What's this conversation about? And you'll spend more time looking at it. And perhaps maybe learn something about it and learn something about yourself. Ooh. Can I get those batteries back? Okay, I just don't want to forget. Thanks. Okay, so we'll talk about one more artwork, and it's here in the front. How are we doing with time?
We're good. It's 1:30.
Okay, we'll talk about two more artworks. I'm trying to get us close to the AC, so let's go this way. So this was one of the first artworks I did in Toronto. I moved here at the end of 2019, and I found myself with some time, and I'd had this idea. So I started this project late 2019, early 2020, before everyone locked down. I had this Japanese television radio. I'd never had one before. And I was curious about what it did. And once again, what I saw in it were a lot of surfaces. I thought I can do something with this. And so as I started taking it apart, I started having to make a series of choices. So the title of this work is All Restoration is the Process of Invention. And what that alludes to is that when you're restoring something, a sculpture, a language, a culture, anything, it falls down to individual choices about what is retained, what is discarded, what is highlighted, what is kept as important, what is downplayed, etc. And I find that comparable to how we do many things. So with this version, the original version was transparent so that you could see the inside and had gold knobs and buttons. This was, I wanted to try a different material, closer to what the original might look like, with series of gray. What I do, the process for making these three-dimensional objects is just like the radio, where I'll take it apart, I'll re-engineer the components, and then I'll reassemble them. These originals are made of, what's the word? Injection molded plastic. Injection molded plastic is pretty sturdy, but also it can withstand a lot of abuse and it won't lose its integrity of aesthetics. I wanted to go beyond just putting paint on something. I mean, I could have gotten an original, spray painted it and put it back together. But then I think people who are used to looking at things with a critical eye would have just seen that it's paint. That seemed like a bit of a cop-out. I have this thing working from my previous jobs about integrity of materials. I want what you're looking at to be what it looks like. So if it looks like gold, it should be gold. If it looks like gray, it should be gray. So by re-engineering the casing, sending it out to be 3D printed in resin or any other kind of material that I'd like, when you touch it or you look at it, that's the material. If it gets scratched, the paint doesn't come off. This material still is there. And so for me, that's very satisfying. And so with the all restoration is the process of invention is the idea that's carried through. The radios have the same title, and it's a series that's ongoing with communication and electronics, particularly ones that are no longer necessarily valuable anymore. If we were to turn this on, you would just get static, and you could listen to the radio, and it works off of 8D batteries. This came out about 1983. Before rechargeable batteries were around. And on 8D batteries, you would get about 90 minutes of television time, which is really not a lot of time when you really think about it. Yeah. So that's where the title comes from. In the bio here, it talks about that I worked with fashion shows, and that's where my interest in the integrity of materials came around. We would create these really beautiful fabrications, and then you would walk up to them and knock on it, and of course it would be paper mache, and it was very dissatisfying for me. Now, I knew they were paper mache because I ran the crews that made those things, but I always felt like working between that kind of artificiality and then working in a museum where things are treasure, I guess looted treasure, or made of the actual materials, gold, silver, jewels, what's the word I'm looking for here? The verisimilitude of those materials caused me to go in the other direction of I want these materials to have that kind of integrity to them. I'm not trying to fool you. I'm not trying to trick you into thinking that what you're looking at something that it isn't. Okay, let's do one more piece, and then let's go back over. I'll show you the first sculpture I ever made, which is this game controller. So this is the first sculpture I ever made. I made this in Brooklyn, in New York, right before I moved to Toronto. So at the time, I went to school. I have a printmaking degree, and I have a painting degree. And when I moved to New York, I started painting in 2001. But at the time, painting didn't feel very urgent. I would go to the studio, I would make some work, and then I would have to go to work and then come back. So I shifted over to media, and I started making videos and animation videos and things like that. And that was really interesting. But then my wife and I started sharing a studio. And I started going back to making some kinds of paintings. But we had different hours there. She was a full-time artist. So I would go to work, and she would be in the studio during the day. And she makes sculptures, performance artists and sculptures. And And then I'd come home for dinner sometimes, and then go to the studio if there was time. So I would show up and see what she had been working on during the day. And then, of course, she would show up into the next morning and see what I had been working on. So there was kind of became a cross-pollination. After a few years of this, I found myself thinking more in terms of 3 dimensions. I liked the idea of being able to escape concepts of post-internet art where everything just exists as an image. With a sculpture, you have to actually be there. You can walk around it. So this piece, I was looking at an image of something. I was at a store, and they had a GameCube controller, and it was transparent. So I did not make this clear case. It came like this, and you can Google clear GameCube controller, and you'll see that it's translucent, and it has the colored buttons, yellow, red, green. And I thought, well, what could I do to elevate this into something that's more aesthetically pleasing to me? By the way, I don't play GameCube. I bought this just as an item, as an object. So at the Met, there was an area there called the Jan Mitchell Treasury. And it's called the Treasury because it's a collection of gold, bullion, and sculptures from the Maya and Aztec collection of the Americas. Spent a lot of time there. It's very influential, and I started thinking a lot about gold. After a while, I acquired a gold statuette. And I took that statuette and I melted it down, and I used that gold to make the buttons on this device. And people have a very different response when I tell this story. I don't tell this story very often. I think I've told the story 4 times, so you're number 4. I get accused of being a person who destroys artwork, and I get a person who, and then sometimes the other end of that is I'm told, oh, that's really fun. Don't get attached to things. For me, this still contains that sculpture. It's just taken on a new form. It's an idea that has evolved into something different. That sculpture is still there. It's just not in its shape. Justin was able to handle this before, and you can vouch to the integrity of the material. It's pretty heavy.
It was the best game controller.
Yeah. So I wanted to show this too as well, because it has that concept of something coming in, being changed, and then adapted, but still maintaining that. Now, if I didn't tell you that story, it would just exist at face value. But now that you know, will you ever be able to look at this the same again? And that's that changing capacity that artwork has. I think I'm done. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Pressing 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Jason. Maybe I'll come up
Q&A?
here.
Is there a Q&A
Yeah,
moment?
this feels like a great spot for a Q&A. So if anyone wants to take a seat too, you can grab
I'm
a
okay.
chair
I'm going to stand.
from around there. Yeah, so we have this. We're live streaming right now. So if anyone has any questions, I'll pass you the microphone, and then your voice will be able to be heard over live stream. We're also taking questions via YouTube as well. So if you're logged into your YouTube account, you can leave some questions on there, and Scott will read them back to us. I don't know if Scott has a microphone or not. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, does anyone have anything to ask Jason about the show?
I just wanted to know that it looks like a model in that case over there that's covered in gold. Is that like a Star Trek model?
It's an Apache helicopter model. So that's the precursor to the work that I'm doing now. So originally, before there was any kind of three-dimensional 3D rendering or printing, I would have to get an existing object and put 24-karat gold leaf on it and put it. But now sometimes I think about that. If I was to do this in 2024, I would just engineer a three-dimensional model and have it done in gold or gold-plated brass or bronze. And I choose it's called Apache gold because it's a pun off of the name of the helicopter plus the native tribe, and then the gold, right?
I'm curious about the centering of like the open air market in the show, and your connections to like Japan and like those experiences and how that became integrated into this show.
Yeah, so I really like having an idea and putting it in tandem with another idea. And you can't do that in isolation. You can't be in tandem with nothing, so you need another draw. For me, working with objects from Asia, those are the things that I'm familiar with from living in New York City. There's other elements too, but those are the ones that there's, the commercial Japanese culture. I'm familiar with that, and so I can speak to that. One of the red flags for me is when I meet an artist and they speak about experiences that are not their own. So I avoid that. I don't speak for anyone but myself. My definition of an identity is how I feel right now and what I'm doing right now. So that's just why I tend to just direct my work into talking about what's happening right now with that thing. So with Japanese things, so with this exhibition, the idea is that you would walk in and some of these things would be very recognizable to you, and some would be less recognizable to you, and then it's your job to figure out what the connection is in that way. And so that's that level of familiar and unfamiliarity. You walk in and you're not sure, well, is that art? Like that plinth, for example. Is this art? Or is that not art? And to me, actually, I like that idea of not knowing where the art starts or stops, because it's a really good comparison to being on indigenous land. You're out there and you're like, is that important? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's like, I feel like with the pachinko machines, like our poster guy was mentioning that he saw them in the Hudson's Bay Company at one point in time. And so like the idea of like the capitalism as like, it can have this like cultural exchange. So, I was thinking about like the VLT machines and, how that's like, a part of our ways, right? But it's also like this feature of capitalism and has this aesthetic quality to it too. And so the recognizability of this piece, a lot of people haven't seen this, but there's still something that, it feels familiar, but also not familiar at the same time.
Justin and I were doing a walkthrough and we were just chatting about stuff. And then he asked about the function of these machines. And then once it clued in, I think you came out and you said, is it gambling? And I said, yes. And then once I said that, something changed in your eyes. And there was a recognition of, oh, now the shape and the form and the playing, it all kind of came together for you because it tied into your familiarization with the slot machines here in Winnipeg or at casinos. And I allude to that with the Thunderbird, right, with the casino theme there. Yeah, it's gambling, and it is very connected to slot machines. And in Japan, it's called pachislo, and it's a slot machine there that they use. But for me, that's a little too close for me to try to integrate or work with, because I don't want to move into. I try to avoid certain themes that are. I'm not a gambler, actually. Believe it or not, I don't gamble. I have terrible luck. I've had to work for everything I've ever gotten. That's what I like to think. So I don't take risks on things. So I don't know anything about gambling, but I do know how to play a game.
Does anyone want to take the mic?
Hey, Jason. Great talk, great show. In addition to you being a terrific and amazing artist and an arts administrator, you're also a teacher. I'm wondering if I could ask a question about your teaching.
Sure.
Just wondering, is there a relationship you find between your practice, like your art practice and your teaching? Or you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I teach at OCAD University, Ontario College of Art, in sculpture and installation. Before that, I taught in graphic design. So when I moved to Toronto from New York, I was working at the Metropolitan Museum, and then I underwent a career change in Toronto. So I decided to do education. I had some experience, and I wanted to work with people who also wanted to be artists and were interested in art. So OCAD is a really good fit for me. What I try to bring into there is permission. I teach between mainstream sculpture and art courses and Indigenous directed sculpture art. There's an Indigenous visual culture program there that I'm a part of as well. There's a cohort of us. And through the work that I make, I try to be a firsthand direct example of do what you want as an artist. Don't feel creatively constrained by society to make only one particular kind of art. When you look around, you see only certain kinds of art being supported. And it's very easy I find a lot of tokenizing happening. This isn't just with Indigenous artists, it's with artists all around.
Yeah.
With materials too, not just with identity. And so I strive to show that you should do whatever you want. and in doing so, expand the definition of what this particular kind of art is. There was a time where Indigenous writers were at the front, and they were being supported for the kind of things they were doing, and then they would switch off and start writing about other things. And Scott Momaday, who wrote a Pulitzer Prize, it's not a Pulitzer, it was a different, Housemaid of Dawn, which was very influential on me. It's from the Jemez Pueblo, Walatoa in New Mexico. Traveled the Russian tundra and wrote about that. No one ever talks about those books. They only focus on the Pueblo identity book, those kinds of things. So I really want to show that you can have the creative freedom to take these risks and chances, and then be a better artist and more satisfied artist. People become, it really impacts me in a really negative way. When I was living in New York, I would meet a lot of Canadian artists who would come down. They would take a look around, and they would express a kind of jealousy. Oh, I can't believe you're in New York. You're able to do whatever you want here. Up in Canada, I have to write a grant, and I have to get a very particular kind of work. I wish I could do what you're doing. And I would say, well, yeah, you can. And they'd say, well, no, we can't. This was 2000, 2010.
And there's a lot less.
Things are very different now.
There's a lot less grants in New York, too.
But that was, I don't know anything about writing grants. So it's a private fund versus every cultural experience in Canada seems to be a state-funded one. So there's that kind of thing. So that's my thing with teaching, is I just strive to serve as an example, give them creative freedom, give them good feedback on things. Yeah.
Thanks, great answer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the crowd? I had a question about the materials, specifically the plastics, and what the reception has been to the use of plastics, and hiring different companies to engage with that, and thinking about this exhibition's approach to capitalism. I find it really interesting, so I would like to kind of hear about that.
That's an internal conversation that I've been having with myself in the studio with regard to plastics and being responsible to the environment. It's really difficult as an artist because artists, we produce a lot of waste, whether we try to or not. It's just part of making something. I can't do a lot about getting away from plastics, but I'm finding myself, and this may come as a surprise to a couple of people here, I'm finding myself moving away from plastics and moving into natural materials with CNC natural materials in that way, which are also more sturdy. The reason we talk about capitalism as is because right now, Winnipeg's a good place, right? The history, the legacy of Winnipeg is that it was always a place of cultural exchange. Pre-colonization. We have something in the Southwest called the Anasazi, who was a very similar thing, huge trading empire that collapsed under its own weight. Here, similar story. Right? Once again, the materials are what we live in a world in an age of plastic. To use something else would not necessarily be of this time. But if there's an evolution of material over time, then that would speak to the time that we live in now.
Yeah, I think I was curious because I use plastic, I use resin in my work too. I've done action figures, and I haven't heard a lot of input about the way people have felt about the use of plastic. So just from the public, have you gotten any criticism of it, or has it been generally supportive?
So the thing about materials is it depends on the person. I told a story yesterday about I used to work with upcycled materials, product packaging, and I would have people who'd come in. It was cardboard, and they couldn't get past the material to engage in any of the other components of the artwork. They would see cardboard, and rather than talk about maybe the design or how things were arranged or the content, what it was about, they would just talk about, this looks like trash. Is this trash? Where'd you get this trash from? And so that was very disheartening. So that's what caused me to make a shift from that into using valuable materials, also from the Met, which is the story, gold, using real gold as opposed to something else that looks like gold paint, and having an integrity of the material where it is what it is. So I moved away from using those kinds of discarded materials. But that is the age that we live in, and that's why so many contemporary artists continue to use upcycled materials. So that's one of those indications. There's two things to me that define contemporary art nowadays in this time. One of them is the upcycling of materials, which is the refuse of capitalism, and the other one is irony. And I try to avoid both of those.
Any other questions?
Actually, it's kind of interesting. I like that you touched on all of that stuff about the integrity of the materials, and that a lot of it is like if we were doing things properly, safely, and correctly, we would have everything would be like the integrity would be there for everything, and that's kind of cool that you're pulling that out, and relating it to the real world, like where we're forced to do everything wrong by the system. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. The social influence, market influence, this can turn into an entire art market influence. Things are like here and then they're different over there kind of talk, or it could also turn into a native talk. But I try to keep it just touch on little things that I'm thinking about, and the circumstances around the work that I'm making them are the things I'm talking about today. There are artists I really enjoy artists who the work that they make tricks the eye. That's different than trying to fool me into thinking something that it's not, right? Oftentimes the strength of that kind of work is the reveal. And then you're like, oh, what a great creative idea that this person did this. That's not what this is.
Well, awesome. I think we're pretty good. We have 5 minutes left, so it might be a good time to wrap up. So if no one else has any questions, and
Just a comment.
yeah.
Just based on what you were just saying, so then you weren't trying to be inspired by Eicher with your pattern work back there?
No, it was inspired by having a very thin studio window and all the sound of people, different languages, people talking, traffic, sirens, garbage trucks, birds, happening all at the same time coming through. And then it's like, what would that visually look like? Oh, lots of interlocking things where your eye can't settle on any one. You think you see something, but then it doesn't stay still long enough and it moves on to something else. And contrast, that's why it's such a high contrast. It's not supposed to be relaxing.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you, Jason. I really appreciate you coming to Urban Shaman and exhibiting here. When I accepted the show, I in our first meeting, I told Jason, like, I'm new to this. I'm new to this role as artistic director, and I'm growing, and I have a lot to learn. So I asked if I can use some of Jason's knowledge and we can have a relationship as we were building the show. So it was super helpful. He's so experienced and such a long career, and particularly as an arts administrator, it was great to get a lot of input on the show. But then he also gave me a lot of creative freedom in building the space, and that was helpful for me. I feel really grateful to have that input into this, and I feel very proud. So
Thank you so much. Do you mind if I have the last word?
yes, for sure.
Thank you. So this installation, just make it clear, this is a collaboration between Justin and myself. I presented some artwork. I gave you some general notes. The note that I gave Justin was, I want to break up the white space. So Justin's idea was to employ particular painted sections and to take details of this painting and move it around. So there's a trust exercise going on. Justin, I always trust in the expertise of the staff of this place. They will know the space better than I ever will. My job is I make the stuff, I make the art, and I bring it over. But ultimately, it lies in the art space to make it, to deliver a good aesthetic experience. And I think you did a wonderful job, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. So this exhibition will be open till September 15th. So make sure to come down. We're open Tuesday till Saturday from 12 to 5 p.m. So come down, see the show if you haven't seen it already. Thank you so much.